Good morning, everyone. My name is Harvi Millar. I'd like to start off by congratulating the Ministry of Education for accomplishing this milestone. The milestone that has seen the realization of the ESDP, and now we are at the stage where we're about to launch it to the entire country. I'd like to also say a very special thanks to the Ministry of Education for giving me the opportunity to facilitate the process of developing the ESDP. It was a fantastic experience. I'm certainly been enlightened by it, and I will never forget the opportunity that I had to meet so many people across the country and have a conversation about the direction that our education system needs to take. I'd like to also thank all the stakeholders and all the volunteers, and of course, the entire staff of the Ministry of Education, including the Minister, the PS, and the Steering Committee, and all of those who worked very hard to make this a reality. My job here in a couple of minutes is to give you a quick sense of how we approach the development of the ESDP. And I'd like to start off, if you would allow me, with this quote by Nelson Mandela, which says, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world." And so as we go forward with this ESDP, we think about changing our communities, our families, our country, our region, and of course, the world. So to develop the ESDP, the first thing we wanted to do was to put it in context, and we had to put it in context of a national vision. To get a national vision, we engaged the various PSs from all of the ministries to give us a sense of what their respective ministers were focusing on, or ministries were focusing on. And collectively, we saw that as part of a national vision. While we did not have at that point in time the details of a national development strategy, clearly the strategic priorities that would form such a strategy was available to us. So the education sector strategy had to be linked with the sense of what a national development strategy would be. Once we developed the overarching framework for the education sector strategy, then we had to distill that down to education subsector strategies, such as lifelong learning, early childhood education, primary education, and so forth. And then, of course, the ministry itself subsequently has to look at its own structure and its own strategic direction as an institution to ensure that there is alignment between the ministry and the sector strategy. In terms of the framework that we use to guide the process, we saw it as having a success model at the pinnacle, which is articulated by a vision, a mission, the value proposition, the values and beliefs, and then the declaration of excellence for education. So once we've articulated that success framework or that success model, then it is supported by a set of corporate principles that say that education has to have quality, it must be affordable, it must be accessible to everyone, we must ensure that it's innovative, and that we work in partnership with all of our key stakeholders. We recognize as our core business quality education, or the delivery of quality education, providing support for students so that they can learn, and then of course ultimately contributing to national development. To be able to achieve that, it is necessary that we put in place what we call strategic enablers. And the strategic enablers involve people and culture, infrastructure and technology, finance and operations, and governance and leadership. So collectively, that provided the framework that we were going to use to structure the ESDP. In terms of stakeholder consultations, we consulted broadly across the country, and I'm very proud to say that the document is truly a stakeholder-driven document in the sense that we were able to interact with all the key stakeholders within the country, both in terms of face-to-face and via the internet. So our stakeholders included regional and international partners such as UNICEF, for example, parents, the business community, learners themselves, of course, government and other agencies, teaching staff, administrative staff, and then the OECS OECS education sector strategy, or certainly the unit within the OECS that deals with education. And so all of those facets were engaged, all of those stakeholders were engaged in terms of helping us to shape what we saw as the strategic priorities for the ESDP. In terms of methodology, we had essentially 7 key steps. The first one was to establish the operating context of the plan, where we saw the plan in terms of the macro environment, what's happening in terms of social factors, political factors, economic factors, and so on. We also wanted to take a look at what's happening in terms of current student performance, and not just locally, but also regionally as well. And we also wanted to look at best practices. So looking at best practices, trends in education, the macro environment within which the education system exists, all of those factors were very important in terms of establishing the operating context. Then, of course, from interacting with our stakeholders and our principal stakeholders, the students, we were able to identify what we saw as core strategic issues. Once we identified the core strategic issues, we created the lens, which was that success model, with which we were going to actually look at those issues and prioritize them. So subsequent to that was the need for us to identify strategic priorities by using the success framework. And then after the strategic priorities were identified, then we focused on each strategic area. We tried to identify what we saw as key outcomes or results that we wanted to achieve. So if we were looking at, for example, in terms of leadership and governance of the sector, what is it that we specifically want to accomplish in that context? So under each strategic area, we identified a number of desired outcomes or desired results. Once we were able to affirm those and prioritize those, then we developed a number of strategic initiatives to achieve those results and outcomes. And then last but not least, this is where the rubber hits the road. We put in place a framework for implementing the ESDP. Because we could plan all we want if we do not have a very concerted model or effort around execution. All the wonderful things that we've dreamt about in the planning stage would not be realized in the execution stage. To put it all together, we use a best practice model called the balanced scorecard. And the balanced scorecard, in our case, we use the typical 4 perspectives of our primary customers / stakeholders, our systems and processes, our people and our capacity, and our organizational infrastructure in terms of leadership and knowledge management. So with those 4 sectors, or 4 perspectives, we were able to come up with a set of strategic priorities for each of them. And so therefore we have stakeholder priorities, systems and process priorities, people and capacity priorities, and what we call the sort of finance / resource based priorities. So with that framework, we were able now to develop all the strategic priorities, the desired outcomes, the initiatives, the performance measures and indicators, and then of course lay out the implementation strategy for all of those. So that is what culminated in the ESDP. I was asked to provide sort of a couple of quick observations. I have several, but there are 2 of them that come to mind. One is that there's a lot of passion for excellence in the education system. Everybody that we spoke to want to see the best for our young learners. And that goes from teachers to administrators to parents to the students, of course, themselves. all the people working within the education system, and even within the Ministry of Education as well. So there is a hunger for change. People want to see something better. We're not complacent. People are not happy with the current performance and want to see something better happen. So that provides an environment within which change can happen. As long as we could show that the changes that we're planning on making will actually lead to better results. However, while there's all of this passion is frustrated by a sense of inadequacy around visionary leadership, that there's a need for greater capacity in terms of teaching quality, and also the capacity. In addition to that, the physical infrastructure, the technological infrastructure, many felt was inadequate for the kind of results that we want. Also, a number of people indicated that they felt constrained by the subscription to CXC and CAPE, in that because it's so heavily exam driven, in as much as the opportunities for SBAs, the reality is the bulk of the evaluation is based on exams. There is this attitude or disposition to teach to the test, and that does not necessarily create an educated individual. It does not teach our students how to learn. And so therefore we are witnessing a lot of the shortcomings in our education system. And then of course, another frustration to the passion is the inadequacy of the remuneration for the folks who have to work so hard in creating an educated society. So these are two principal observations that I want to mention, in addition to many that I could talk about. I just want to end by giving you a couple of personal thoughts. One is that I think we need to rethink what a number of people have identified as an elitist culture within the education system, and that essentially we need to democratize education, making it accessible to everyone, and then ensuring that there's equality and equity in the education system. Antithetical to that thought is the use of things like common entrance, minimum standards tests, over-testing in early grades, and so forth. So if we truly want to democratize education and allow young people to explore what their talents are and discover that, we need to rethink our preoccupation with grades and being able to classify people into A students, B students, and C students way too early in their development. And so therefore we need to consider the elimination of the use of things like common entrance completely. I think also too that if we want to bring about democratization and give people a greater opportunity to discover their skills and talents, that we may want to consider structuring the education system into primary, middle school, and high school. And high school ought to reclaim lower six and upper six. So in other words, we go to primary school, Form 1s to Form 4, and Forms 5 to upper 6 as high school. And then allow SAAFA to exist as an independent tertiary institution, not an extension of public school, but an independent tertiary institution offering high demand associate degrees and certificate programs, and allow people to be able to come in and take one associate degree, leave if they feel like, work for a couple of years, come back and do a second one if they want to, as long as they meet the entrance requirements for the various programs. So create a bit of in other words, separation between the public school and SAAFA as a tertiary institution. So these are my personal thoughts that I want to just mention. And so I will close by saying, if we want to advance our country, we certainly must advance our children. And to advance our children, we need to advance our education system. With that, I say thank you very much, and I bid each and every one of you who's going to be engaged in the implementation of this strategy all the best. Once again, thanks to the Ministry of Education for giving me a chance to be involved. Thanks to PS and the steering committee and the minister and all the volunteers whose time that they took to share with us their wisdom and knowledge. Once again, thank you and Godspeed.